Hi, I'm Melissa Bill, and welcome to the Business Roundup, where we catch up with the movers and shakers in the business world. Today, joining me is Cem Zorlular. He is the CEO of Chem. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Now, healthcare and access to it is a very big topic. I think that's globally. It is in the US, but I mean, obviously, there are other countries where it's really a big topic. And the global access to drugs, being able to get pharmaceuticals is a very big issue for a lot of places. Before we kind of dive into the topic, can you start off about telling us a little bit about your background?
So I'm Cem. I'm from Turkey. I've actually joining this business because it's our family business. It's our the third generation owners of the business. And I was born and raised in Turkey. Then I went to US for school. And after US, I spent a bit of time working for US tech companies, primarily for Palantir. And I've done a fair bit of work sort of traveling around the world, helping Palantir's different businesses around the globe. And about 6 years ago, after my father passed away, I decided to come to Turkey, take over the family business. And I've been running the business for the last 6 years or so, along with my brother.
Now, have you seen, what is some of the things that you've seen that have shaped your perspective on global drug access?
It's so the way I see the global access is when we say access to medicines, we always think about price. And, in the US, in the Western Europe, we always talk about pricing. And when we talk about the rest of the world, which is primarily where we focus, we think about sort of low income countries, essential drugs, no one can get it. But, when I had this personal experience with my father who was battling cancer, we were lucky enough to have money as a family. We were very connected to the industry because that's our job. But even then, we had difficulty accessing the medicine. So that helped me better formulate this thinking, which I call a thousand paper cut model or thinking when it comes to inequity to access. It is obviously a bit about price, but there are so many other factors that lead to not the same number of medicines reaching for people all around the world as they do in the US. One key thing about it is that, we think about these low income countries, but the inequity to access also applies in countries that we believe are high income, like Slovenia, like Greece. They don't have the same level of access that the US has. So it's a global problem, a multi-level problem, and it's not only about money. If not, money is a small part of the problem.
It's just about actually getting it there and having it in that, in that vicinity or whatever. So that makes sense. And what specific aspects of the legacy are you most committed to upholding for your family business, your company?
So, since my grandfather set up the business has two things that really resonated with me as a family and that made us quite successful. One is just being humble. We're in the business of pharmaceuticals. Focus on your work, get things done. The second piece is sort of focus on these small frictions and always think about how to make them easier. Because at the end of the day, we work with a lot of small to mid-sized US biotechs. So our goal is if we can make their life easy to navigate all these markets, then we will be basically addressing the inequity step by step. So, it's the same thing that we have been doing. When it was my grandfather's time, it was a war in the region, military coups, export controls. Now we're actually in the same situation, same problems, different medicines, but always trying to find the solutions that make sure that these sort of 1,000 paper cuts gets resolved.
It makes sense. It doesn't matter if it's war or something else. There's always going to be, or if there's just let's say a particular disease that's on the uprise and that's going to cause shortages. Now, how is Urchem focusing on rare disease treatments? What kind of things, can you explain how this specific area is so crucial for these areas?
Yeah, so where we focus in terms of treatment delivery, we focus more on the rare diseases, pediatric diseases. We work a lot with children with cancer. We work with a lot of children with congenital rare diseases. So mostly with children, sometimes with adults as well, but primarily on the rare disease segments where the medicines are fairly expensive and very complicated. So that's sort of the type of treatments that we do. We right now have 68 products in our portfolio from multinationals, small to mid-sized biotechs from the US, from the EU. And our core business model is delivering access to these medicines to more than 50 countries around the globe right now. And these are as high income countries as Slovenia and Greece, or they could be quite low income countries like Tajikistan or North African countries. So very wide variety of treatments and the countries that we work with. And obviously each come with different challenges and opportunities.
And in these places, what are some of the unique challenges that these patients are facing?
From patient perspective, it's a very different situation that they're in. Living with a rare disease is a very tough thing to begin with, and anyone who's in the rare disease shoes feels it, whether they live in the US or they live in any of the countries where we operate in. But the key challenge is the infrastructure. In the US, in Western Europe, children with rare diseases, adults with rare diseases have access to a lot of accommodation, support groups, and that's why they're able to sort of support themselves a bit easier compared to where we work with. Whereupon in countries where we work with, let's talk about, for example, childhood epilepsies. We work with some very rare forms of epilepsies where when there's no infrastructure, it's the patient's family's entire job to keep their children alive, because there's no kindergartens, there's no sort of facilities to make sure that the kids get a good care. So the impact that the patients and their immediate families face are much more deep because of this lack of infrastructure. So when you're able to treat these rare diseases, you're not only making the patient's life better, but having a much more broader community impact to people who need to support that patient through the family ties. So that sort of is the main difference that the patients have.
That makes sense. And with Western markets, you rarely do you see these kind of dramatic shifts, or like, is it more like what are, we were saying what are some of the areas, but where are you seeing like I guess the greatest need? You were talking about a little bit earlier, I think.
Need from the access perspective or from patient
Yes,
perspective?
yes, for access.
So when we look at the individual challenges of sort of non-Western markets, the key big name challenge is that there is no stability. There's always things that are changing, and that is not necessarily a bad thing because a good state does not last for long. It ends up being a bit more difficult to plan, but at the same time, the window to deliver medicines to more patients are always open or openable. So from our perspective, we can talk about these individual challenges. It could be the regulator changing all the rules overnight with no compliance period, the funding situation changing, the compliance rules being more complex, there being a war overnight. All these challenges happen all the time. But if we take a step back and look at what's the first principle of the big challenge and what we need to adapt is this constant change and not being able to plan. So our approach pretty much revolves around thinking Bayesian, as in we think about what could happen and how we would react, as opposed to plan for the long term. That sort of is the biggest way that we think a bit differently from the US or Germany or sort of Western Europe perspective.
So you're kind of thinking ahead and trying to see like if this comes up, which is probably going to, how are we going to navigate through that?
Exactly. So we always think in A, B, C plans, and we attach a likelihood to it. We don't invest as much into the A plan because there is no stability, and that sort of is the key issue there. But the way we adapt is to have these B, C, D plans in the back of our minds. And what might cause the change? It could be the war, it could be a regulatory change, it could be a financial situation. But that's sort of how we think about, and that's how we address these challenges at a principle level.
Now, given the significant challenges, what unique strategies and business models does EarChem have they developed to navigate through this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the first sort of thing that we do is what I said as a principle. We don't commit to plan A. We always think about plan B, C, D, E, F, and so on and so forth. So that's the way we think. The the way we implement this first starts with the culture and the company. So we work with people who are very happy in unstable environments. They are very adaptable, and that attracts a very unique type of personnel. They see opportunity when things change, not a problem. Obviously, problems come. So that's sort of one thing that we do. We are very, very prudent when it comes to financial management. Cash management is something that we really stress on to make sure that we can weather all these changes. And sort of those three key pillars end up being some of the main ways we address this. And Once you have the right team, right thinking, and financial resources to pivot quickly, then we are in a good place to sort of pretty much react to anything that might be thrown at us. And that, we believe, ends up being our strategic edge. The final piece to this is that at the end of the day, we work with companies who are innovators. We work with a lot of biotechs, and us being able to navigate is not enough. We're representing them, and they are accountable and responsible to their counterparties there. So a lot of things that we do is to make sure that all of the issues and the risks that exist in our part of the world are not reflected to the day-to-day operations of our partners, and they feel comfortable of what's happening from risk perspective, so that they can focus on what they do best. They can make sure that they prioritize making these treatments available while we do our own thing on the ground. So that's sort of the four things that we do to make sure that we can navigate all the challenges and opportunities happening in our parts of the world.
So yeah, you were saying these partnerships are like play a big part. So we're talking our local governments, maybe healthcare providers, international organizations. How do they play a role in overcoming these drug access barriers?
So before sort of local counterparts, I also want to sort of go back to the biotech partnerships, because there's a lot that US and European based biotechs do to tackle this from what they can do. So the first thing is actually they're fairly flexible and accommodating, being able to navigate new access models. I've said, finances are not much of an issue. That's because they're being very supportive of different access models to make sure that more patients can get access to treatments, especially when the budgets are tight on the local side. That's our biggest partner in terms of the first principles perspective. Then we work very closely with the healthcare professional communities, because in a lot of developing markets, they spearhead a lot of change. We talked about the infrastructure. There are a lot of infrastructure to treat a rare disease that needs to be built. So we work a lot with healthcare professionals, the hospitals, the medical community, to support the infrastructure build out to an extent that we can, both legally and ethically. We work a lot with local NGOs to make sure that the patients are heard. We don't interact with patients due to ethical rules in our parts of the world, but we do support the community to make sure that they can advocate on their own behalf. And finally, we do partner or work with a lot with governments, but we do focus a lot more focusing on the medical community. The governments end up being a counterpart to these discussions, because they have their own role of making sure that their patients have access as well. So it's a strong partnerships across a lot of different stakeholders across the board. And final piece, again, we think more about health care in general. So it's not just about drug access, but about diagnostics. In the case of rare disease, we actually support a lot of programs to not just diagnose patients that have the rare disease, but how do we make sure that we can decrease the likelihood of more patients being born? Marital counseling programs, all these are the partnerships that we do to make sure that there's a holistic improvement in the healthcare in countries we work in.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so kind of trying to make a difference, prior to these things, like kind of, like health preventative type of measures. And are there any successful collaborations that you can highlight in particular?
Yeah, I think I can't name names because most of these companies are public, and we're in the Q2 results season. But one of the, for example, recent successes that I can mention is we have launched this one new treatment in the area of a rare endocrine disease. It is a very debilitating disease that eventually leads to death. And the key challenge that I want to highlight there is, it was a very successful launch for our partner in the US, in Western Europe. But for the first time ever, patients from Montenegro or Greece or Turkey or Kazakhstan had the access to the drug at the same time as their peers in the US or Germany. So this is, from our perspective, is a very, very important feat, because the average for access to these type of treatments is at least 4 to 5 years, if not never. Being able to have delivered this treatment at the same time has been a big, big success that we have celebrated. We've done this in multiple drugs this year, so we're very happy about this. But this is the thing that makes me the most proud.
Yeah, because that saved lives potentially and made a big difference. I mean, you're talking years, cutting off years to that access.
Exactly. And the second piece that I sort of, it is ethically the right thing to do. It delivers a lot of value. It saves lives. but it also shows to the companies that this is also financially the right thing to do as well. And the reason I want to emphasize this, and that's why one of the things we want to highlight this, because when it's a model that is commercial and that works in and of itself, then no one needs to push it. It happens on its own versus a charity kind of a structure. So being able to sort of show that this is doable and profitable to biopharma companies, we're also spearheading more prioritization, more focus, because it is not just an ethical commitment that everyone keeps as a high priority, but also it's a feasible business model that brings even more resources to solving this issue.
Now, looking ahead, what is your ultimate vision for Airchem for improving rare disease treatment access?
I think, do more of what we do. So basically, to encapsulate what we like to happen is, boards in the US, in Europe, think about global launch at the same time as they do of their US launch or European launch, just so that, when we are able to do this well and make sure everyone knows about how this is doable, then the problem will start solving by itself. There's a lot of work to do. So what we're doing is to keep innovating ourselves, to keep solving these little problems, because it's not just money. It's about, it could be import document. It's like very, very small things. So by solving these small things, we just want to keep proving that it is not just doable, easy, but also feasible. So that's the sort of vision. I know it's a very vague thing versus saying we want to be doing this, we want to make this much money. But if we solve this problem, the revenues will come, the geographic footprint will come. Right now, we're in 50 plus countries. We're getting a lot of demand to expand to even more countries. But that's not because we're pushing this. That's because as we solve problems, as we show that this is both profitable and valuable and humanitarian, then there's a lot of demand coming, and all of that comes by itself.
And what gives you hope for like the future and like kind of helping to resolve, you know, propel, this complex field, like trying to make a difference in this field?
I think technology innovation is giving me a lot of hope. There's more and more medicines that are coming out. There's the impact of AI that are making a lot of things that made things difficult much easier. And again, these are very boring problems, but using these two, technology and an improving view of international markets, is giving me a lot of hopes that our job will get easier and easier every day.
And now, if people wanted more information on Airchem, what's the best way for them to find it?
Our website is a good place to start, or I'm happy to answer any questions, or LinkedIn or Instagram. I would love to sort of speak with anyone who is more interested in this topic themselves.
Thank you for joining the Business Roundup, where we always try to bring you interviews with some of the leading people in business, whether it be technology, finance, or energy. I hope you tune in. I hope you subscribe and listen, and we'll give you updates for new interviews that are coming up. Until next time, I'm Melissa Bill.